I don't know what you do in that situation, because at first, like, you think some kid is just like walking up to the scene, and I'm scared enough getting like grabbed and dragged away. And then I get a call from my dad, like literally about a minute later, trying to tell me the news.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Angry Ginger podcast. All right, today I'm super excited because one, I'm back on track. So a lot of life has happened in my personal life, but we're not here to talk about me. But it's been a few months since I've recorded one of these, and so I'm super excited to be back on track. I've got some time, and yeah, I want to stick to this. I don't want to give up on this. I got some goals, and I just really enjoy doing this. So I'm happy to be back on the show. So real quick I said I don't want to talk too much about myself, but if you don't know, I'm back in Oklahoma now. I'm also back in law enforcement. And so I have a lot of life. I also now have a son, and I've been to the CrossFit games, and I've had an amazing year. And so I'm very thankful for that. And so now I get back on track with the Angry Ginger podcast. Today's guest is from Colorado, and like many of my guests, I met through the gym at Coda Iron View. She happens to be one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. And what's cool about it is not only is she super smart, but she's actually very personable. So she can carry on a conversation. She can make you smile, make you laugh, and is always the person on this show. We talk about being kind because you never know what somebody's going through. And she embodies this message as someone who always chooses kindness. And it's just somebody that I look up to, especially in that regard. Always has a smile on her face. So today, welcome Tayler to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here again. It's so great to talk to you again, and I'm so proud of you for this last year. And I'm so glad you're just killing it at life.
Well, thanks. See what I say, everyone. She is so kind. She is so yeah. So well, tell me what's going on. So I mentioned that she is super smart, but Tayler, tell me exactly who do you work for and what do you do?
Yeah. So I work for this company called Blue Origin, which is a rocket company, and I am part of the lunar transportation team. So I get to work on the lunar vehicle. So essentially, I'm a rocket scientist, and I'm part of taking us back to the moon. I work on the guidance, navigation, and control team on the integrated simulation team. And I can tell you a little more of what that means. So essentially, before you fly the vehicle, you need to build it up and understand how it's all going to work together. So that way you don't just waste a bunch of resources building it and then being like, oh, that didn't work, let's try this again. So we have to understand it before we build it / kind of as we build it. So I get to work on that. And I work on specifically a lot of the fluid dynamics on the vehicle. So,
Wow.
and my vehicle is called Mark 1. So Mark 1 is the cargo lander, and then we have the crewed lander. So us and SpaceX are the only two space companies that can fly NASA astronauts to the moon. So we have to fly our cargo lander twice. And then
Oh
our
my God. That is just wild. Guys, I don't know if you actually heard everything she just said. She works on stuff that goes to space. And then she does all of these programming and numbers behind the scene to make sure that it's going to work before it even takes off. And technology is just wild these days. And then there's people behind the technology that actually run it. That is just fascinating to me. Now, okay, I got to come clean. I've been having some conversations with folks lately, and I I believe that we went to the moon. But there are some people that are like, I mean, adamant that the moon landing was fake. Can you confirm or deny right now if we have been to the moon?
I mean, absolutely. So this cell phone right here, that takes more technology to build my smartphone than it did going to the moon. Like, it's pretty incredible. Also, why would we lie about that? Absolutely. We've been to the moon. We have to sit here and say, how did Apollo do this? And the mistakes that they made and the successes that they had in order to move forward. And so that was a manned mission, though. So why it's so hard right now is we're trying to do this without humans. We're trying to have the vehicle fly itself. But yes, absolutely. We've definitely been to the moon.
Hey, all right, all of you that say we didn't go to the moon. There. All right, Taylor's way smarter than you, I promise. She says we went to the moon. That's funny. Okay, that's good to know because I actually, I hear some arguments and I'm like, okay, I can see that. But the problem is, I've talked to one of our members at Coda Ironview, Steve Lindsay, who has been to space, is in the astronaut Hall of Fame, and I
Mhm.
just he's way too good of a guy to ever be able to carry on this whole facade that we never, done any of that, and then you as well. So I'm
Mhm.
Regardless of other speculations, I know people that are involved in the industry, and I'm a Moon believer. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Aspen, Colorado. Very unique place.
Aspen, Colorado. Oh my gosh. Okay, so my first time hearing about Aspen was probably like most of our first time, and it was in Dumber and Dumber. Whenever,
Yes.
whenever he meets the girl, and she's from a little town called Aspen. So
Yep.
I also know I've been to Aspen one time, and it was golly, I guess 9 years ago. It was my second wedding anniversary. We went to Florida, we went to Colorado, and we stayed in Breckenridge. And one day we drove up to Aspen because that's, I guess, what you do. And went up
Yeah.
there, and the town is so affluent. It's incredible. I mean, they have like all of the designer stores, and everybody's driving really fancy cars. And so, whenever you told me that you're from Aspen, the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I had this perception of what that meant. And turns out, I think I may have been a little off base. Tell me a little bit about some of your upbringing, and did you grow up in that affluent lifestyle of the Aspen that we think of?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So again, this happens a lot. You're definitely not the only one. In fact, actually, most folks, the first time I tell them, which I try to actually not mention it until you get to know me a little bit, because there's a lot that comes with being from Aspen. So no, I did not grow up on the more affluent side of things. So I was fifth generation born in Aspen. So I was there because my family has literally been there forever. So we just got there and claimed the land first.
Wow.
Yeah. So and my dad were divorced, and they both worked. And so no, they didn't really, they weren't like crazy, incredible rich people. We all had to work for a living and like help out and do our part. So no, definitely not. In fact, I was actually more on the side where I was actually made fun of in school a lot. And I was actually not popular a lot of because I didn't have the means to buy the newest clothes, and I got hand-me-downs and like things like that. And it's something that unfortunately kids are kids. And so in a community like that, that will happen.
That is wild. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even register that, oh, there's a possibility that there's like farmers or, people who, you said that your family claimed the land first. How much land is it, or was it, or any of that
Yeah.
stuff?
So essentially, so if you've ever been to Aspen and you are driving between Aspen and Snowmass Village, which a lot of people are like, oh, that's the same thing, right? Well, it's like the town of or the city of Aspen and then the town of Snowmass Village. They're only 15 minutes apart. But if you're driving from Aspen going to Snowmass and you drive by the airport and you go up this like first hill, essentially from there almost all the way like through to Snowmass, and even a little bit I think on Buttermilk at one point. We ran cattle there, we ran sheep there, we had chickens, and so we had a lot of land. We were one of the founding fathers of like Snowmass Village, which is really really cool. So
That is cool. That's also cool just to know that, like, all right, the farmers are overlooking the town there. They're like,
yeah,
all right, we'll take care of all you hippy dippy rich folks down here in Aspen.
yeah, and at that time the miners, that's when the silver boom was happening. So
Probably fifth generation. So how many years does that go back? Do you think that your lineage is like in
like
Aspen?
I think it's 1800s. Yeah.
That's so cool. Wow. Little history right here on the show. That's so
Perfect.
you grew up, you already mentioned that your parents were divorced. So you grew up in Aspen or Snowmass Village.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that your parents were divorced. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. And I know you have a very unique and empowering story of kind of like where you came from and some of the stuff you saw growing up and stuff like that. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, my mom and dad, well, so one, again, my mom's from Aspen. And she was just an incredible person. She was just this beautiful wild child, where you couldn't help but smile if she was in the room. She had really infectious energy. So many people loved her. She had so many friends. She does definitely in the party scene a little too much. Her and my dad met. I don't even remember exactly how they met, but my dad was a band groupie, and he moved to Aspen because he was a Hollywood stuntman for a little bit before moving to Aspen. Decided that lifestyle wasn't totally sustainable, and so he's originally from Minnesota, moved all around, and had a crazy life. But he lived in Aspen. He continued to model. He was a ski instructor, still is a ski instructor, and yeah, he plays music. And so he's a band groupie, and so somebody who would definitely attract my mom. which
Uh,
is cool.
it's I mean, I obviously want you to continue here in just a second, but you mentioned that your mom was always smiling and kind of infectious and like brought smiles to others. I would say that she has definitely passed that gene onto you because you do that everywhere you go. You're always smiling. It is like it is so contagious, and it's just I know anybody that you always work out of the 12:15 class or generally
Mhm.
work out at 12:15 class, and everybody is happy to see you when you come in, and you're like you never have a anything other than a big smile. You're never even neutral. You're always smiling really big. So it's very contagious. So
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, there were a lot of good things I tried to gain from my mom. And actually, like the positivity that she did have, I really valued that growing up. And I think she really shared that with me in my younger years. I flipped through photo albums and I'm also always smiling. Like she and I have the biggest smiles on our faces. And so this smile, it's technically shrunk probably from when I was like two from most of our pictures, but yeah. Um, but yeah, so I grew up, my parents fell in love. They fell in love kind of late. I actually didn't find out for a very long time that my mom married my dad, and that was her second marriage, which was really interesting. She didn't have any kids with the first marriage. And then I was an only child born between my mom and my dad. And then when I was two, unfortunately, my mom cheated on my dad. Back then, she was saying, like, hey, I want to keep the house and the property because it was right across the street from her parents, and it was a couple acres of land, maybe even up to 3 acres. So beautiful, and it was so great to be literally across the street from my grandparents and their giant ranch. Small house, big land. um, and so my dad had to like go live out of his Jeep for a little bit. He was like, yeah, okay, like, I just want to be able to see my daughter, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to do that. So if you want the land, like, just don't take my daughter away from me. And so he lived there for a little bit. And then, thanks to a few of his very, very special ski clients, he was able to move into a place so that way he didn't have to live out of his like 1970s Jeep during the winter. Get back on his feet, was able to rent a place, and then eventually able to buy a place again. And actually, that's where he still lives. So it's kind of cool. Ever since I was like 10 or so, he's owned this like townhome that's tiny and hasn't been renovated since the 80s, but it's just home. And I went back and forth between my parents every day. They only live 15, 20 minutes apart. But one night I would spend with my mom, I would go to school, and then the next night I would be with my dad.
Wow.
And so you can imagine maybe as you're younger, that's okay. As you start to get older and homework starts to get harder and friends and like actual, brain development, that gets harder. You start to leave things places. And then eventually, my mom did find another person who she really wanted to marry. She battled breast cancer twice, actually, with this person. And she also lost her dad, so my grandpa, when I was decently young. And I think it was really, truly between those two things, and especially the loss of her dad, that she got really, really depressed. And to a point where this person that she was with couldn't be with her anymore. It wasn't healthy for him. He wasn't happy anymore. And so he left her. And you can only imagine that made things worse. And so she really went downhill. She turned to alcohol. She turned to other drugs. I believe she turned mostly to cocaine. I was too young to really understand that. I could definitely recognize and understand alcohol. And so she would start not picking me up from places. Like I did figure skating and ballet essentially growing up. And I ran track. I was part of a family of runners. And my dad, of course, made me ski. That was my dad's sport though. So my mom and dad kind of split sports. Ballet was my mom's sport. And, some of the moms would be waiting around a little bit and they'd be like, where's your mom? Are you going to get picked up? And I couldn't get a hold of her. My dad would sometimes have to come get me. And I eventually, I was old enough, I would just ride my bike. And even in the dark, I would just ride home in the dark. And I would come home, she'd be totally passed out. I had to figure out something to eat. Usually I would try, if there was something to eat, I would try and save a little bit for breakfast. But that meant maybe I would get lunch, maybe I wouldn't, because if the money was out on my lunch card, who knows, what would happen. And so I had to learn as sub 13 to distribute resources and to learn how to wake myself up so I could catch the bus on time and do all of these things. And unfortunately, like her tendency has got worse and worse and worse. So where she became very physical and very verbally abusive.
So whenever the what am I trying to say here? What was your motive? Do you know what your motivation was to at 12 and younger to be like, oh, well, my my mother's not doing these things. I need to take charge of this situation. And so I'm gonna get myself up. I'm gonna make food. I'm gonna still like go to extracurricular activities and I'm gonna have good grades. Like what did you have a known like compass, like motivation that led you that way, or was it just intrinsic? Like tell me about that because I can't imagine being that young and seeing that much and recognizing like, oh, my mother can't do these things for me, so I have to do them and I'm gonna stay motivated to do that.
Yeah. I mean, man, luckily hindsight is 2020, much better than when I was in it. So I've got a few guesses, and I'm pretty sure this encompasses the whole thing. I think it's a pretty equal share actually for all of this. So one, my dad. My dad is the best Mr. Mom you've ever met. My dad loves me so much and so unconditionally, and he's wonderful. He on my nights with him, I'd be like, I know I'm gonna be okay in a night. If anything, I just need to make it through this like 24 hours and I will be able to be safe. I know I will be picked up. I know I will have a hot meal. Like I know I will have somebody who is gonna give me a hug and say I love you. And so my dad is a really, really big savior in this. And he was like, there's not, I can't do much because even back then, when I was that age, it was still hard with the court system to battle something like that until you have enough evidence. And so he was slowly documenting things. But my dad, I grew up in a family of cowboys and cowgirls, especially cowgirls. My mom had two sisters. It was all girls in that family, and they're kind of like there's good and bad things to it. But they're the toughest people. They say like you got to get up, you got to do your job, which your job was school, your job was sports. You gotta stay, you gotta keep going, kind of no matter what you feel. And now nowadays we're a little bit better about being like we should talk about how we feel, and still get it done to a point where we can get things done. So I was just kind of raised in that mindset of like, well, you got to keep going. You've got no choice. Like you just got to go. And then my friends, my whole life, I've really put so much of myself into my friends, and I would literally do anything for my friends. And so my chosen family. And so going to school, even if I wasn't going to have very much lunch, I got to be with my friends. I got to sit with my friends. I got to hang out with my friends all day. It was just at home, and my home life didn't have to be my school life. I could be whoever I wanted almost at school. So,
Wow, that's so. I'm sure you've heard me. I've quoted it on many different episodes, but Emily Frid was on one time, and she, amazing quote. She says, "I am not what happened to me. You know, like these things happen, but I am not. That's not the person I am. I'm, who. And you're living that motto at 12 and younger. And I gotta say, as a new dad, for you to say first and foremost my dad, it like literally gives me goosebumps like on my neck of just like, man, that is what I hope to be for my kids and my wife and my family is like the motivation, the like everything that you just mentioned is, oh, that is awesome. Like I don't know, I could just stop right now and just focus on that because it just hits different. This is my first episode to do since I've had Shep, and man, hearing you talk about your dad is just like that is I don't know, anybody that's listening that is a parent will be able to just listen to that and hear that and be like, dang, okay, there, be good to your kids because you never know how much of an impact it's going to make. And also, I mean, for that matter, be good to those around you because I mean, you also mentioned that your friends were there for you. So, anyway, that is golly. And so you have this kind of instilled in you between, cowgirl up,
yep.
your friends, and you have your dad kind of leading the way. And so you just kind of keep marching on. And even though you recognize some things don't maybe necessarily aren't right or aren't normal, you gotta keep going. And then
Mhm.
so you get into kind of your teenage years. And then when have you got in your teenage years? were you still dancing and figure skating and skiing, or did you have to start working, or like what, or all of the above? Like what kind of went in on those early teenage years?
Yeah, definitely. Well, also, first of all, you're going to be the most amazing dad in the world. So, I'm going to shout that out because everybody who's listening already knows that, but I want you to know that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I eventually stopped figure skating. It kind of got down to you need to do this more often. I was starting to get more serious about track. I was having a lot more fun with that. Hanging with my older cousin Kelsey. She's like my big sister. She's been my whole life's role model. She's just the best. She's also always been a really positive person, and she's a really, really great person to be around. And I got to be around her a lot. And she was running track because her older brother was running track, my oldest cousin. And so I was like, oh, I got to keep up. I gotta go along because I was the youngest one. So I was starting to get more serious about that. Figure skating was like, you have to wear makeup, you have to be girly, and you've got to commit to this more. And I was like, honestly, I care way more about running track because they're not holding me to these standards. And so I did give that up. It's fun to go back and figure skate, and I actually reconnected with my old coach, which is kind of cool, a little bit. And so yeah, I still have friends who I figure skated with, and so they still do it. And so track and skiing really were what I ended up focusing on. And ballet, I stopped also because it just got really catty and I couldn't quite keep up. And also money from my mom started getting a little iffy then because she started to not be able to hold a job. And my dad was like, I don't even know how he paid for his figure skating, to be honest. Like I got to ask him. I'm going to ask him that next time I go home. And so let alone ballet. Um,
It's
so
funny how
yeah,
you just mentioned the cowgirl up thing, or how you had cowgirls that influence you, and
yeah,
then you go in and you're like, well, I mean, if you compare ballet and figure skating versus track and skiing, they're two opposites as far as the I don't know, keeping up with the Joneses anyway.
yeah,
Like, all right, go do work in one, and the other one is like, well, do work, but also look the part and act the part, and socioeconomics, all that stuff. Whereas, like, all right, if you can run fast, you can do some good things at track.
yeah.
So, uh, and if you have some guts to just like go down the mountain fast, you'll probably do okay at skiing. So,
Yeah.
which fits much more in line with the cowgirl influence, at least in my opinion. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was definitely the black sheep of the family doing all that. And so my like best friends in kindergarten figure skates. That's what got me into that. I don't even remember why I started ballet. I might have just been put in ballet and was like, okay, this is what I do.
fair enough. Fair enough. Very embarrassing
Yeah.
story. My sister is 5 years older than me, and so growing up, she would go to dance, and
Hmm.
I shouldn't tell the story, but it's okay. I was like, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 4 or 5, and we went
Yeah.
to go pick up my sister from dance one day, and I asked my mom, I'm like, hey, when do I get to start dancing? And thank God my mom was like, you'll probably play like baseball or something. I was like, oh, okay. And so then like the next week, I was like, so when am I playing t-ball? And she was like, well, guess we'll start here soon. So thank goodness she wasn't like, well, you can dance whenever you want to.
Right.
Nothing against people who want to dance, but I don't think it would have been for me. So
For sure. That's totally okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how parents influence that. I'm really happy for it. A lot of flexibility comes from that. And I have a lot of respect for dancers for sure. And I think it's really cool. I try to actually associate a little bit back into that nowadays because it's good for me. It's good to be opposite a little bit. But yeah, so that's kind of where that started falling out. But yeah, right when I could get a job, I got a job. So I think in the state of Colorado at the time, 14 was the legal age you could get a job. And so my dad would try and give me money for movies when he could. Sometimes I could tell he like really didn't have it, or he had to be like, do you want to do something else? um and so I started working. I was a milkshake maker and food runner at the diner, Boogie's Diner. It's not there anymore. They recently got rid of it. Super sad. It was a really, really big icon in Aspen. It was a super good time.
I mean, any place named Boogie's Diner has got to be delicious. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
it was good.
Anything
Yeah.
with diner in it is usually really, really good.
Oh,
Man,
for sure.
oh yeah. So, so at 14, you start working on top of still doing track and skiing. And you've
Mhm.
mentioned kind of a couple of times you've kind of hinted around that finances with your mom is started falling off, and you start picking up on that. You obviously get a job to kind of help with some of the things that you want to do. But was it did you actually have to help with finances, like for like living purposes, like bills and stuff too?
Not till a little bit later. My dad is, again, he's the best person in the world. He probably wanted to, but he was far too proud. He was like, nope, you're gonna try to do this. But I tried to sustain myself, anything. If I wanted to buy myself something nice, like if I wanted a new bike, if I wanted to go to the movies, if I wanted an iPod, I paid for that. And so I learned the value of that early on. And at this point too, so by the time I was 14, by 13 years old, if your parents were divorced, legally in Colorado, you could choose to not live with one of your parents anymore. And so that's what I did. It was kind of an unfortunate last night. I really tried to stick it out with my mom, but there was just one night where, like, here's kind of an insight of what happened. Only one of my friends ever experienced this. By the way, I actually kept my home life. People had no idea what I was going through at home. I did not talk about, yeah, no, I did not tell my friends what was going on
All
at
your
all.
teammates, like, did your dad know?
My dad knew. My dad was literally the only, and maybe my grandparents, on my mom's side, or my grandma at that time. Um, I think they're literally the only people that knew. I did not talk about this to anybody else. But I'd go home, she'd be passed out, and that was kind of the calm before the storm. When you drink a lot, unfortunately, it makes you really sick sometimes. And so she would wake up, and she would usually, if I was there and she knew I was there, she would sometimes come running and screaming into my room. And that's when she would get really physically violent with me, until she literally had to go get sick. And sometimes it did not make it to the bathroom. And so it was like I would be thrown up on, she'd throw up on the way to the bathroom. I had no idea what to do. I was like, I guess we clean this up. She's not going to. And she would like spend the rest of the night pass out in the bathroom after doing these things to me, after screaming at me and scaring me to death. And so one time when I was 13, I was starting to forget homework at her place. Like, I tried to spend as little time as I literally could there. And that just kind of made things worse too. On the nights that she was aware I wasn't around and there was no reason for me to be around, she was getting upset. So it was just the abuse was just getting worse and worse. And one night she was just totally passed out. She woke me up, and in the middle of the night, and I went into the bathroom and I was like, I don't think I can do this. And she looked at me, she got conscious enough to sit up and to look at me and dead in the face and tell me that if I leave, that she wasn't going to love me anymore, and that she didn't love me. And so that unfortunately was one of the last nights in London, one of the last times I saw my mom. And so as a 13-year-old, I didn't know what to do. So my teenage years were a little interesting. So I lived with my dad, but because that hurt me so deeply and I didn't have any idea how to process it, I walled off to my dad a lot, because the only other person that I loved that much was my dad. And the only person who had hurt me that much was my mom, who I had loved. And so my dad and I actually had kind of a rocky relationship through my teens. Again, this is where the unconditional love part comes in, where he didn't care, he stuck with it. And I know there were really hard times for him, and he didn't understand, he had no idea what was going on. And I didn't know how to connect with that. But now I can talk about it and I can say, like, here's what happened. And as I moved out and went to college, I was able to really reconnect with my dad and say, like, hey, I learned that I can trust you, and that this is okay, and that love is okay, and being open is okay, in order to get that back.
Yeah, it sounds like it was kind of a protective mechanism for you. Like, oh, I love my mom so much, and she said these things and hurt me in these ways. The only other person that I love this much is my dad, and I can't give him the opportunity. If I show that I love him this much, well, then there's an opportunity for him to hurt me, and so
Yeah.
I'm gonna walk off. And so if he does anything similar, well, then at least I won't feel it as bad, because I have this wall built up. Oh man, the fact that you recognize that, and then also the fact that your dad sounds like you talked to him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, I love you, girl. Don't worry about it." I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
here,
Yeah,
that's
he
amazing.
stuck with me.
That's amazing. Golly, that just feels so good. Again, from a dad's perspective, you're just like, God, that's so much easier said than done. And for him to actually live out you know, those values like that is
Yeah.
pretty impressive. So your mom turns to drugs and alcohol to cope with a number of things that have gone on kind of in her life and kind of build up. And you eventually move in with your dad. I guess you moved in with your dad shortly after that.
Yeah, that was the last night. That was the last night I lived with my mom. So I grabbed what I could, left a lot behind, and said, Dad, I'm not going back. I can't.
I think
So, and at this point too, we had enough proof that it would have started to be okay if she decided to go to the courts. She didn't have enough money really to. But I mean, the counselor at school started noticing that I was starting to come to school with marks and something wasn't okay. I still remember one of my teachers not forgiving me for leaving a homework assignment at home at my mom's when I spent the night at my dad's. And I was like, it's done. But, and things like that were coming up. And at that point, you know, I was starting to get old enough. I'm like, I can't have this happen to me anymore. Like, this is literally, I'm working so hard to try and be normal. And you have no grace because you have no idea what's going on in my life. And so this has to stop.
how old were you at this point?
I was like 13. I was 13.
Oh my gosh. That'll, man, it just pulls at your heartstrings. You're just like, man, at 13, you know, you should be worried about the dance recital or the track meet, not the
And I was still worried about that on top of everything else.
gosh, what a just a push and pull of like this mature Tayler that's trying to, you know, do all these things, but then also you're 13, like, can you really be like that mature? Like, you got to have, you know, the silly 13-year-old girl stuff going on, right? But living this almost like a double life, for lack of a better term, of, you know, home life and then social life. That I imagine that makes you mature very, very quickly as far as your emotional intelligence, stuff like that, which could be a good thing, but could also be very impactful on, you know, how it shapes the rest of your life and how you deal with stuff moving forward.
Oh yeah. I kept everything all right here. Again, my friends, like if I was moody or something or like anything like that was going on, you know, they just had no idea why. I did not want to share it. Like I wanted to live a life where I was like, oh yeah, everything's fine. And even like to their parents, it's like that's what it would all seem. And yeah, nobody had any idea except for my dad what was going on. So
Oh, so you move in with your dad around 13, 14 years old,
mhm.
and then yeah, I guess go from there.
Yeah. So working at the diner until I was about 16. And then I said, I actually like this is kind of monotonous and I'm kind of bored. I want to do something more. And one of my best friends at the time worked for the On Mountain Photography Company. So being from Aspen, I still, even though I wasn't popular, I wasn't rich, you know, I wasn't everything you think of with Aspen. Um, I was like, hey, I have this opportunity to literally go make commission and so make a lot of money being a photographer during holiday seasons and like summer and even just on weekends and even helping out with after school in the shop a little bit with this photography company because tourists buy their ski photos and summertime photos and everything. And so that was super fun. And I got to work with my best friend at the time. So that was super cool.
All kinds of positives.
Yeah, well, and literally that was really what taught me. The work I put in is the work I get out. Since it was commission based, it was like, okay, if you do nothing today, you're not going to make anything. So good luck. um, but yeah, so that was cool. And then relations with my mom just really died off. You know, I would try and see her. It was always violent whenever I saw her, and so I couldn't anymore. She would almost like she would get so messed up she would almost hallucinate. So my cell phone, I've had the same cell phone number since I was actually really young because when I started getting left places, I kind of put this together later. I got a cell phone to be able to call my dad when I was left somewhere and like wasn't being picked up. And so, and it was just like, it was a normal phone. It didn't even flip. It was just like a little brick and I could play Snake on it. And then it called. And like, I don't even think it could text.
And it was super terrible. I know it was.
Oh, for sure. I felt so cool with it, but also like it was very much so a necessity for me. um, and so my mom would call my phone and leave voicemails about asking why I'd like run off because we got in a fight. The police showed up at my dad's door one time, being like, "Your mom just called us saying that you were missing because you guys had a fight and you took off." And so it's kind of the same reoccurring thing. And it's like, I haven't talked to my mom in months. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so she was literally like reliving things from my past to that. And that was really hard on me as a teenager. Again, I'm starting to worry about boys and all sorts of other problems at this point. And you know, my mom's stress was less, I guess. but she started having to be hospitalized. And so the high school track coach, who was a middle school teacher, who's been like a friend of my family's for a long time because he was everybody's track coach, he would sometimes have to drive me in the school during the school day over to see my mom at the hospital, and just be there with me. And sometimes she wouldn't say anything. Sometimes she would be cordial. Sometimes she would get mean. And so it was kind of a roll of the dice. And so I'm starting to like feel like my memories went from literally like my last, I don't know, the last 4 years of my life, like with my mom, were just hospitals, unfortunately, or like nasty phone calls.
Was she in there for detox, or was she in there for like getting treatment for liver shutting down? Or what was she in the hospital? Oh, liver.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Too much.
Mm.
So, and like I didn't, again, I didn't process it. I kept it all here. And the fact that an adult at school knew, that was really weird for me, because I'm like, this life is supposed to be totally separate. Um, I even think I pushed away one of my friends who did experience that, the wrath of my mom, essentially, and like what I went through whenever I was at my mom's place. Because I wanted to show that life. I had horses, I go horseback riding, I had fields and fields upon fields to run through and watch the sunset, and it was amazing. But then you go home and it's like, and my mom was like awake and conscious when she got there. We go out and play, we come back, and she's passed out. And I was like, I really thought that tonight, because we talked about having a friend over, you wouldn't do this. And unfortunately, she got scared enough from what happened that she had to call her mom. And and then her mom found out. And that also was going to help with the scenario of like, I'm going to get away from this situation. She was going to vouch for me. That was kind of rough. So that friend I actually ended up pushing away, because I was like, oh, you know too much. You
Mm.
can't know too much. And so it's weird that my lives started meshing a little bit more as I left that life, I guess.
Mm. Golly, man, I can't imagine being that age and going through all the normal high school stuff, and then having that on top of it. And unfortunately, it probably happens way more than I realize. That's yeah, that's really sounds extremely tough. So you kind of get to a point where it sounds like you've referred to that your mom is, in the past tense every time you've talked about her.
Mhm.
So can you tell me a little bit about what happened there, and whenever your mom did pass, and that whole story there?
Yeah, definitely. So I was 17. I was in my junior year, the end of my junior year of high school. And in February, I was actually dating a guy I had a crush on for a long time, and he was a really good person. And I do mention him, and I do want to give him a shout out for literally just being a rock, especially in high school, where you have no idea how to do that. Being a high school boy, and like him and his family were just amazing to me. And honestly, I'm really thankful for his love and support at the time. Um, but I was 17, and I go home, and I actually had a fight with my dad. And at the very end of it, he was like, well, we sat down to have a conversation originally because I needed to tell you that I have cancer, and it's pretty far along. And so I cry my eyes out all night. I have a ski race the next day. I show up to that ski race. Apparently, like, luckily word kind of got around, because I was really isolated. I didn't know what to do. Like, literally the person who saved me from this, and like it was subconscious, I didn't really recognize that at the time, um, was maybe going to be taken away from me. And so that was in the winter. And then where he's working out how he's going to get treatment, where he's going to go and do all of that. And so this is where I start working. Like, as soon as summer hit, I start working like 6-7 days a week. I'm like, I need to do this, because he was like, I don't know how I'm going to afford this, but I have to go. And he was driving back and forth between Aspen and Vale every other day to get treatment. And so I was in charge of like food in the house and trying to pitch in where I could. Um, and then in the middle of the summer, I was with my coworkers, and we were going to go to the free Thursday night concerts on the ski hill, because in the summertime they build up this whole stage, and it's super cool. It's a really fun free event for the community. And we were driving there, and again, I live between Aspen and Snowmass, so we were driving from Aspen going to Snowmass, and there's 3 police cars parked outside of my mom's house as we're driving by. And so my boss slows down and she says, do you want to go look and see what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, you should go see what's going on. And so we turn around, we go back, and I walk up the steps and I walk in the door, and I get a glimpse of something in the distance, and then I get grabbed and pulled out by two police officers yelling at me saying, what are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm the daughter of the person who lives here. And they stop and they say, so your mom has been found dead, essentially. You really need to leave, and we're really sorry. And didn't know what to do. I mean, I don't know. I as a police officer, I don't know what you do in that situation, because at first, like, you think some kid is just like walking up to the scene, and I'm scared enough getting like grabbed and dragged away. And then I get a call from my dad, like literally about a minute later, trying to tell me the news. And so, yeah, my mom had officially killed herself because of alcohol, and it was unfortunately intentional. And so that was just a really hard time. And my whole family came together, and it was really good to be with them for a few days. And my boss was like, you just let me know when you are ready to come back to work. She drove me where I needed to go. And so 17 years old, and now my dad has been gone essentially all summer, and now my mom is gone. And so I didn't know where to go or what to do. And, my dad's in medical debt. And so that was a really, really hard time. And then being a 17-year-old girl, already when you're not popular because you're not rich and like you didn't have that background, and girls were getting nicer, I was making other friends. But man, that was a hard time. That was a really, really hard time. So.
And I can't imagine going through that. And then also just how that whole situation, I mean, there's no good way necessarily to find out that news and learn the death of your mother, but that would seems like one of the hardest ways to find out. Not that it's ever going to necessarily make sense, but to that be your last memory of your mom is, I just can't imagine how impactful that is. And then it'd be one thing to hear the words from your dad through the phone, but having your dad call you after you've already been on scene, and you throw in the dynamics of police and your boss with you, and just the unknown, and the last thing you expect is that I'm showing up to, at least I would think, the last thing you expect is I'm show up to find my mother no longer with us. It just kind of takes you away. And then, like you said, you stack everything else up. It's just like everything's piling up on you. And yeah, you're right. 17's, I hate to say it's tough. Sound like, I don't know, like be soft, but like 17's tough. There's a
It's
lot of things
tough.
changing and going on, and you're about to be out on your own, or at least be legally an adult, and all these things. And then, yeah, even though that your mother wasn't necessarily a pillar for you to like live by, or a foundation for you to stand on, still it's your mom. And you've said this whole recording about, you've definitely you start off by saying all the amazing things about your mom. And then even when you talk about some of her hardships, you just talk about them as hardships. You don't talk about them as like, oh, my mother, she did some bad things, but she also did some good things, and she instilled some good things in my life. And so I think very mature of you, and give you credit for that. But that it's still your mom, no matter what, abuse that you went through or you witnessed or any of that stuff. Like you only have one mom. I mean, one biological mother that, and so going through that, man, I'm so thankful. It makes me even more thankful now that I haven't gone through that, but it makes me empathize even more hearing you tell the story. And then also going through like what your dad was going through at the time. And it sounds like you said he still lives in the house, so he obviously got through cancer and
Yeah.
made it the other side. And so
Mm-hmm.
with, I mean, so many dynamics in your life growing up, and some pretty extreme hardships that you had to go through, yet you're always smiling and always positive. And that's a huge takeaway, but also is something, whenever I do these podcasts, I like to ask some questions and kind of, you know, and so you mentioned that the foundation for you whenever you were younger of like why was because your dad and your friends, and then kind of the cowgirl up attitude. And now as you've grown up and you've become, an adult now, you have a very nice career ahead of you, and you live this lifestyle. What are some things now that you would like, let's say you could talk to the 14-year-old Taylor and you could instill in her some values or some messages, like what would kind of be your feedback for her at 13 or 14 years old?
Oh man, I mean, the first thing I'm going to tell her is that you're going to make it and you're going to be okay. And in fact, you're going to be really good. And that it's all worth it. Like what you're going through is really worth it. Um, and also to tell her it's okay to talk about it and to open up to other people. Like stop holding this all on yourself. And I still do that. I still have tendencies to do that. But man, it feels so much better when you share and you open up to people because they're going through something too, and maybe they can help you, or maybe you can relate and you can feel not so alone in it. Because that's the thing, is like I felt really alone a lot. But I would tell her that everything's going to be okay, especially. And again, keep your heart open, like love your friends, love them so hard, love your dad even more, like stop, be nice to your dad. I know that's hard and that's tricky, but yeah, the love is what makes it worth it. The good people in your life are getting you through this. And,
Gosh,
and that's still true.
I love the positive message that you're sending there. One that you're going to make it through it. That is awesome. I heard a quote. I've heard this quote many times, but I heard it again here recently and it resonates with me. And it's a man who has a why can endure almost any how. And even though when you're going through a tough time, maybe you don't know your why yet, maybe you do. Maybe you're fortunate enough that you do know your why, but know that there is a why out there. And if you don't know it yet, it will come to you at some point. And, so if you don't have your why, continue to search for it and try to find it and dig for it and know that it's there. And then once you establish it, you can endure almost any how. And I feel like that's pretty empowering. That's kind of along the same lines of what you're saying. One, it's going to be worth it. Like you're going to do some amazing things in your life moving forward. And I think anybody can hopefully resonate with that. Whether you are, young, you're a teenager going through tough times, or you're an adult, or maybe you're adult, grown, have all this life going on, but you're going through a tough time. You keep going. You'll get through it, and lean on those around you who can help share the load of what you're going through, Um, and every podcast, it comes up that you never know what somebody's going through. And so choose kindness. And a roundabout way kind of said that. One, as you grow up, you can, yeah, as you experience all those things, you can empathize with people now these days and all of that. And that's empowering. And I love to hear it. Um, I,
Yeah.
I wish I had some more time to ask more questions. But I do want to kind of wrap it up. And but before I do, I want to give you one opportunity. The first, give you the opportunity. Is there anything else that overarching that you want to mention or bring awareness to?
Yeah. Again, I hope that people like can hear this story, and I hope some part of it speaks to you, but also like I want you all to know I've had to go through therapy like my whole life because of this. And I'm still working through a lot of things, how I choose relationships. It depends a lot on this. She defined love for me. And so did my dad. I did have a healthy love, and then I had a not so healthy love. And so I have to work really hard to make sure that I'm holding up standards for myself, because I will put up with a lot. And I know there's a lot of people out there, and especially like, and I know men do this too, but especially women, we put up with a lot more than we probably should. And I've seen that firsthand with a lot of my friends too. And just know that like, you're gonna like, you might get hurt, but keeping your heart open. I know that sounded funny, but like you gotta have an open heart and an open mind, and you gotta love, because without it, it's not worth it. That's not worth it. That's the best part of life. And so the bad emphasizes how good the good is, and you can always get through the bad. It's always worth it.
You mentioned the word love, and now I can say this, and I don't care anymore because but used to I'd be like, man, I can't talk about love too much. That's kind of soft. Man, I got a kid now, and I'm like, man, I'll talk about love all the time because I just freaking love love. But you're
Mhm.
so right. I mean, that is what life is all about. And if you get through the tough time, or you will get through the tough times, and love will be there in some form, if as long as you're looking for it and you're open to it. If you have a closed heart, then yeah, I mean, love is hard to get in. But if you'll just be open and know, like, yep, maybe I'm going through a tough time, but you know what? There's going to be something there here
Yes.
soon enough that it's gonna light up my world. And that's so awesome. And then you mentioned about therapy that you've gone through. And some people have a stigma associated with it, and that's one of the purposes of this show, is to try to break the stigma associated with mental health and talking about it. But you also made a good point, like you can just lean on those around you, even if you don't go to like a clinic or a hospital or something like that. Talk to those around you, and your friends that will listen to you and give you input and be honest with you, versus the ones that'll just kind of be like, oh yeah, sorry about that. And, the ones that can actually help you through those times and
Yeah.
work through them. And
Yeah.
then those that are just kind of like, they're your acquaintances. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. So lean on those that are close to you.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh man. So I could talk to you another hour about everything. I really could. I love getting to chat with you and get to update on everything that's going on in your life. That's so fun. I know that we didn't necessarily record all of that aspect, but I always love getting to talk with Tayler. Tayler, thank you so much for sharing your story. Um, Before I kind of close it out, you mentioned your kind of message. Is there anything else? I don't want to cut you off if you had something else.
No, not really. I guess the only thing is I'll throw in, because I know he's gonna listen to this, but I love you, Dad. I'm really happy you're here. So yeah, thank you for everything you did for me.
Man, that is the best closing there could be. And on that note, Dad, Taylor's dad, I got to say thank you so much for raising such an amazing person with so many smiles and so much positivity. And as a new dad, I've mentioned it so many times, but I guess it's a big part of my life. Yeah, it's really motivating as I'm being on this side and hearing the story. So Taylor, thank you so much for sharing your story. Everyone listening, remember the whole goal of this show is to break the stigma associated with mental health, and to remember that you never know what somebody's going through. So choose kindness when you can. And thanks for being here. Thanks, Taylor, for your time.
Thank you.